For 50 years, everything was just fine, until he came back. You may think you've forgotten your first love, but what if one day he suddenly knocks on your door? This is the kind of story that only those with a heart can bear. Clara's life was calm and predictable. At 72, she had a quiet farm, a steady husband, and decades of memories that felt like they belonged to someone else. But everything changed when Gabriel returned, forcing her to confront a story of love and heartbreak she thought was left in the past. If stories like this capture your imagination, don't forget to subscribe for more. It helps us bring you even more tales of passion and betrayal. Clara's life with Daniel had been built on reliability. They had been married for over 50 years, raising children, running the farm, and watching the seasons change with little variation. At 72, Clara thought she had everything she needed: stability, family, and a home she knew like the back of her hand. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, Clara would sit by the window and let her mind drift back to a different time, to when she was 22, to when she had met Gabriel. Gabriel had been her first love, a whirlwind romance that had burned brightly and ended far too soon. He was adventurous, charming, and wild in a way that terrified and thrilled her. They had planned to run away together, leaving behind the small town and the expectations of family. But life had other plans. A misunderstanding, a cruel twist of fate, and Gabriel was gone, leaving Clara to marry Daniel and settle into a life of quiet steadiness. She hadn't seen Gabriel since then, until now. The day Gabriel arrived at the farm, Clara's breath caught in her chest. She was 72, but the sight of him instantly transported her back to the girl. She had been, 22-year-old swept off her feet by a man who seemed to hold the whole world in his hands. At 74, Gabriel had aged gracefully. His once jet black hair was streaked with silver, but his sharp green eyes carried the same warmth, mischief. And understanding that had captivated her so long ago. At first, they exchanged only pleasantries. Gabriel spoke to Daniel, recounting his travels and sharing stories of far-off cities. Clara hovered in the background, busying herself with tasks that didn't really need doing, but her heart raced whenever Gabriel glanced her way. It was as if he could see right through her calm demeanor to the storm of emotions brewing beneath the surface. Over the next few weeks, Gabriel's presence became a steady part of life on the farm. He helped with repairs and joined them for meals, sharing stories of his adventures. Each tale felt like a window into a life Clara had once dreamed of but never dared to pursue. Gabriel spoke of bustling streets, of art and music, of places where life moved fast and every day held something new. Clara listened intently, though she told herself it was just polite curiosity. But it wasn't just curiosity, it was longing. One afternoon, Gabriel caught her alone in the garden. He smiled, a lopsided grin she remembered all too well. "Still tending to your flowers, I see," he said, crouching beside her. Clara laughed softly. "Some things never change." "And some things do," Gabriel replied, his tone shifting. His voice grew quieter, more serious. "You seem different, Clara, happy but not." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Clara looked down at her hands, brushing soil from her fingers. "Life isn't always about happiness, Gabriel. Sometimes it's about what's right, about duty." Gabriel tilted his head, studying her. "And does it ever feel like duty is a cage?" The question sent a shiver through her. Clara didn't answer. She couldn't, but Gabriel didn't press. He simply nodded as if he understood and stood to leave. From that moment on, their conversations grew deeper. At first, they spoke only of the past, shared memories of their youth, the places they used to visit, the dreams they once had. Clara found herself laughing in a way she hadn't in years. Her cheeks flushed with the kind of joy she thought she'd outgrown. Then, one evening, as the sun dipped low over the fields, they found themselves walking together. The golden light cast long shadows, and the scent of freshly cut hay filled the air. Gabriel spoke of his regrets, roads not taken, words left unsaid, and the people he had lost along the way. "I always wondered," he said softly, his voice almost a whisper, "what would have happened if I'd stayed? If I hadn't left you?" Clara's breath caught. She stared straight ahead, unable to meet his gaze. "That was a long time ago," she said, though her voice trembled. "We were young, foolish." "Maybe," Gabriel said, "but it didn't feel foolish to me." They stopped walking, the silence between them thick and charged. Clara finally looked at him, and in his eyes, she saw the same intensity that had once swept her away. She felt her resolve crumbling, the walls she'd built around her heart beginning to crack. But she couldn't allow it. Not now. Not after everything she had built with Daniel. In the days that followed, Clara tried to avoid Gabriel, but fate seemed determined to throw them together. One morning, they ended up in the barn, tending to the horses. Gabriel worked with practiced ease, brushing down a mare, his movements calm and steady. Clara watched him from the corner of her eye, her hands trembling as she fed Shadow. "You still have that fire in you?" "Clara," Gabriel said suddenly, breaking the silence. "I can see it. I felt it when we were young, and I feel it now." Clara shook her head, trying to dismiss his words. "You're imagining things," she said. "I'm not that girl anymore." "No," Gabriel said, stepping closer. "You're stronger now, wiser, but that fire, it's still there. And it's beautiful." His words hit her like a wave. She wanted to tell him to stop, to leave, to let her go back to the life she had built, but she couldn't. She felt trapped between two worlds, the one she had chosen and the one she had dreamed of. That evening, as she lay in bed beside Daniel, Clara stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Daniel's steady breathing filled the room, a reminder of the life she had built with him, the decades of loyalty, of raising children, of weathering storms together. But in the quiet darkness, all she could think of was Gabriel's words, his gaze and the girl she used to be. The air in the barn was heavy, the quiet hum of the night broken only by the soft rustling of hay beneath Clara's feet. She had come to check on Shadow, hoping to clear her mind in the familiar comfort of her horse's steady presence. But when she stepped inside, she found Gabriel there, his back to her as he brushed down one of the mares. For a moment she considered leaving, retreating before he noticed her. But something rooted her to the spot, a pull she couldn't deny. Gabriel turned, his face lighting up briefly before softening into something more restrained. He set the brush down, his hands lingering on the stall door. "You shouldn't be here," Clara said, though her voice lacked conviction. Gabriel stepped closer, his expression gentle but unwavering. And yet here we are. Clara's heart raced as he closed the distance between them. She felt trapped, not by Gabriel, but by the emotions he stirred in her. It wasn't just longing or desire, it was a raw, aching need to feel seen, understood, alive. "You don't know what this is doing to me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, I do," Gabriel replied, his voice low and steady. "Because it's doing the same to me." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Clara's knees felt weak, and she reached out instinctively, her hand brushing against Gabriel's arm. The touch was electric, sending a jolt through her that she hadn't felt in decades. She pulled back as if burned, but Gabriel didn't let her retreat entirely. "You were my first love, Clara," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "And even after all these years, even with everything that's happened, I still feel the same." Tears welled in Clara's eyes. She wanted to argue, to tell him that he was wrong, that their love was nothing more than a relic of the past. But deep down, she knew it wasn't true. Gabriel's words awakened something in her that she had buried. Long ago, a part of herself she thought she'd lost. "I have a life, Gabriel," she said, her voice cracking. "A good life, Daniel. He's a good man." "I know," Gabriel said softly. "But do you love him the way you loved me?" The question shattered her. Clara's breath hitched as she struggled to find the words. Her silence was answer enough. Gabriel stepped even closer, his hand brushing against her cheek. She closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, despite the voice in her head screaming at her to stop. And then it happened. His lips met hers in a kiss that was gentle yet intense, filled with all the emotions they had suppressed for so long. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a reckoning, a flood of memories, regrets, and unspoken truths. In that moment, Clara felt everything she had tried to forget. The thrill of their youth, the pain of their separation, and the undeniable connection that still lingered between them. But as quickly as it began, it ended. Clara pulled away, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this," she said, her voice trembling. "This isn't right. I made my choice a long time ago." Gabriel's eyes were filled with a mix of longing and understanding. He nodded slowly, stepping back to give her space. "I don't want to hurt you, Clara," he said, "but I had to tell you how I feel. I had to know if there was still something between us." "There is," Clara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But that doesn't change anything." Gabriel held her gaze for a moment longer before turning away. "I'll leave in the morning," he said quietly. "You won't have to see me again." As he walked out of the barn, Clara's heart felt like it was breaking in two. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, her mind racing with questions she couldn't answer. Had she made the right choice all those years ago? Was she making the right choice now? Shadow nickered softly, nudging her shoulder as if sensing her turmoil. Clara buried her face in the horse's mane, tears soaking into the coarse hair. She whispered into the darkness, unsure if she was speaking to herself, to Gabriel, or to the life she had left behind. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry." The next morning, Clara sat on the porch, watching the sunrise cast soft golden hues over the fields. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of dew and hay. It should have been peaceful, but her heart felt anything but. She hadn't slept, her mind replaying every word, every glance, and every moment of the night before. Gabriel was leaving. She hadn't gone to say goodbye. She couldn't. The thought of facing him again, of seeing the pain in his eyes, was too much to bear. But as the sound of his truck starting up echoed across the farm, Clara felt a pang of regret so sharp it took her breath away. She closed her eyes, gripping the armrest of her chair as tears threatened to spill once more. Daniel stepped out onto the porch, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand. He handed it to her without a word, then sat down in the chair beside her. For a long time they sat in silence, the unspoken tension between them thick but familiar. Daniel had always been a man of few words, but he was perceptive. Clara knew he sensed something had shifted, even if he didn't yet know what. Finally, he broke the silence. "You've been distant, Clara," he said softly, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "I don't know what's been going on, but I know when something's weighing on you." Clara's hands trembled as she held the mug, the warmth grounding her in the moment. She turned to look at Daniel, her eyes searching his face. He looked older than she remembered, the lines on his face deeper, his shoulders slightly hunched from years of hard work. This was the man who had stood by her for over 50 years, who had weathered storms, heartbreaks, and joys alongside her. The man who had never once asked her to be anyone but herself. Tears welled in her eyes. "Daniel," she began, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to say this. I've been thinking about the past, about the choices we've made, about the life we've built." Daniel's gaze didn't waver. He simply nodded, waiting for her to continue. "I saw someone from my past," Clara confessed, the words spilling out like a dam had broken. "Gabriel, he came back, and it brought up so many things I thought I'd forgotten, things I thought I'd buried." Daniel's face remained calm, but she saw the flicker of pain in his eyes. He didn't interrupt, letting her speak. "I didn't do anything to betray you," Clara said, her voice cracking. "But in my heart, I don't know. I feel like I betrayed myself. I let myself wonder what life might have been like if I'd chosen differently. And it hurt, Daniel. It hurt so much." Daniel exhaled deeply, setting his mug down on the wooden table beside him. For a moment, Clara thought he might lash out, demand answers, or leave. But instead, he reached over and took her hand in his calloused fingers rough but comforting. "We've built a life together, Clara," he said, his voice steady. "It hasn't always been perfect. I know I'm not the most expressive man, and I know I've failed to give you the kind of excitement or passion you might have wanted. But I've loved you every single day, even if I didn't always show it the way I should have." Tears streamed down Clara's cheeks as she squeezed his hand. "I know, Daniel, and I've loved you too. You've been my rock, my partner, my everything. But sometimes I wonder if I've given you the best version of myself. If I've held back because of fears I couldn't even name." Daniel nodded, his eyes softening. "Maybe we've both held back, but we're still here, and as long as we are, we can try to be better, for each other, for ourselves." Clara's heart ached at his words, the simple truth of them cutting through her turmoil. Gabriel had awakened something in her, yes, but what she shared with Daniel was something deeper, something forged through years of shared joys and struggles. It wasn't the fiery passion of her youth, but it was a love that had weathered the test of time. As the morning light bathed the farm in warmth, Clara felt a sense of clarity she hadn't felt in weeks. Gabriel was a part of her story, a chapter that had shaped her in ways she couldn't ignore. But Daniel was her present, her home, her partner in every sense of the word. And while she would always carry a piece of Gabriel in her heart, she knew where she truly belonged. That evening, Clara walked to the barn, her steps lighter than they had been in days. Shadow greeted her with a soft nicker, nudging her shoulder as if sensing her renewed resolve. She ran her fingers through the horse's mane, whispering softly, "Thank you for listening, old friend." As she stood there, the cool evening air wrapping around her, Clara made a silent promise to herself, to Daniel, and to the life they had built. She would let go of the past, not to forget it, but to honor it as a part of the journey that had brought her here. And that's where Clara's story ends, or perhaps where it truly begins. Life is full of crossroads, decisions, and moments that define who we are. If stories like this resonate with you and leave you wanting more, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We have so many more tales of love, heartbreak, and redemption waiting for you. Don't miss the next one. Hit that subscribe button now, and we'll see you soon.